Okay, Wikipedia already has it on there. How fun. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Elections Daily's UK Conservative Party Leadership Election podcast or stream special. I'm Peter, joined with Sarah and Aaron, and we'll be today talking about the first round, the end of the first round of the Conservative Party leadership election, which in this round is dealt with the MPs. And I'll let Nick start us off with what's happened. Aaron, oh my goodness.
Yeah, so at the moment, Rishi Sunak has a very commanding lead with 88 backers. Penny Mordaunt in a somewhat secure second. 67 is Truss in third with 50. Kemi Badenoch with 40. Tom Tugendhat with 37. Suella Braverman just clinging on with 32. And Naheem Zahawi and Jeremy Hunt are both out. The expectation is that it's likely that Jeremy Hunt may end up be backing Tom Tugendhat, and apparently negotiations may have started for that.
And
So yeah,
thoughts,
that's the
Sarah? Oh,
roundup.
sorry. Mhm.
Sorry.
Well, sorry, what we're seeing is quite a gulf between the membership and the MPs, which I think is the same in every party. I think the membership of Labour is a lot more left wing than the actual parliamentary party. Rishi Sunak, I've not seen much popular support for him among members. He's not polled considerably highly. People think he'll win, but they don't want him to.
Oh, yes, it's the interesting dynamic. Of course, today YouGov came out with a poll which very much was shockingly showing Penny Mordaunt ahead of all the of all the candidates, especially Rishi Sunak, who for days his campaign had been briefing that they wanted to build an insurmountable lead among MPs, and that was probably not the news they were hoping to get from the polls, that their man is getting blown out by Mordaunt and Liz Truss, which of course hurts their argument of being elected as the top of the front. But it has been really intriguing to see Penny Mordaunt become very much the front runner overnight, very much with the support of being the fresh candidate compared to Sunak and say Truss being the former, one being the former chancellor and the one being the foreign secretary.
Well, that's really interesting because there doesn't seem to be much agreement amongst the pollsters. We've seen various different pollsters come out, some saying Tugendhat's ahead, some saying Mordaunt's ahead. What was interesting about this YouGov one is that it had Truss absolutely dominating Sunak if those two were in a head-to-head, which is, a possibility considering currently how fragmented the right is, and how if they were to unify under one candidate, potential that one of them would be able to get into the top two. We heard for ages that it was really a race between Mordaunt, Truss and Sunak, for months building up to this, and Mordaunt is someone who's always been kind of closed down within the Conservative ranks about the possibility of them getting in. And it's interesting to see how she's kind of developed from nowhere to being this person that, yes, everyone really saw coming but didn't see coming.
Any thoughts on Mordaunt's rise, Sarah?
Well, she seems to be a bit of a force. I remember when she dominated Angela Rayner in a PMQ's debate. Gosh, that's going back a few years now, isn't it? I can't remember the exact year, but this is going back. It's way before COVID. And, and to be honest, I think a lot of the popular support is a lot of blokes like her. And even women think she's like a very attractive woman. So, putting that aside, maybe that's part more of a meme thing than, supporting her just because she's an attractive lady. But she has seemed to rise pretty well because she's not had any major scandals. She's sort of just been steadily going along, which I think has helped her because she's not sort of tainted like Rishi Sunak is, or even Jeremy Hunt, because he was a very unpopular health secretary, and I'm glad he's not going through.
Oh, yes, it is interesting to see her rise, and she's very different. I think what most people would expect of your average conservative. I mean, for better or worse, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss and Tom Tiggin to an example is what I think the average person would expect of a conservative MP. She tends to not fit that dynamic, which might be her strength, that she's unique and different. Which, of course, in her case, she's been a trade minister. As a minister of state, not in the cabinet. So it seems to be intriguing that she's getting this change support, even though she has been a part of the government, but not in the predominant sense. It has also been very intriguing to see Tom Tiggenhat very much become, it seems, the option of some of those who genuinely want the party to move in a little bit of a different direction with a fresher face, still keeping around with and genuinely getting support from intriguing parts of the party itself as well.
Tom Duggan, is certainly an interesting figure. I think that he also would probably come into the way which many people disassociate with the Conservatives nowadays, but probably was associated with around a few years ago with your David Gauks, etc., being in there. But he's someone who has kind of suggested he would be running for Prime Minister for a very long time. But seemingly didn't have as much organizational capacity as one would expect, considering how long he's kind of insinuated he would run for a leader. But he certainly defeats the notion that you have to be a face that's got experience in cabinet for a considerable amount of time, in a similar way to Penny, but also to a much greater extent, and still have a good crack at leadership. This is probably just because he's not been tainted by the scandal. He's been extraordinarily vocally against Johnson for a considerable time now. And I think him doing, pretty well, which without these circumstances would not be happening. It kind of suggests that maybe there is more anti-Boris sentiment within the MPs and the membership of the Conservative Party than some expected.
I think he's going to be more of a sort of a liberal conservative, which I think will work against him because Boris Johnson, and obviously he presided over COVID, and we have to pay for things, but at the same time, national insurance increases, tax rises, it's all going up, and conservatism to me means not that big government spending. So I think that's going to not really work out for him. And I've seen a few sort of supporters of his, but it tends to be the sort of the more liberal faction. And if he gets down to the final two, then, like I said, the membership's a lot more conservative.
Well,
I think that... well, go ahead.
So I was going to say, here's the thing, is that Rishi Sunak specifically is someone who's somehow universally hated by both factions, and I'm not really sure how he's done that, because the Liberal side see him as someone who really propped up the Johnson government, who they detested, and the right side see him as a traitor to the Johnson government. So he's put himself in an extraordinarily awkward position that the MPs clearly aren't seeing, which is why we're seeing Penny Mordaunt in polls sweep the floor with him. Even Tom Duggan has a good chance against him if he were to get into that line, just because of how everyone's so anti Sunak. I mean, look at Grant Shapps, who endorsed him, and the only people who publicly have re-endorsed haven't gone with Shapps to Sunak. Even his most loyal backer hasn't gone with him. And I think that really shows how toxic Sunak is in the minds of many people who aren't already automatically supporting him.
Yeah, I mean, the Sunak factor is very intriguing because this is a man who was the chancellor for 2 years, arguably has been preparing his leadership bid since last year. There are those who probably would argue he's probably been the main one who's destabilized the government at sometimes. Very much getting this hateful reaction. Some see him as the man who caused a lot of the economic mess the United Kingdom is currently in. And then, of course, there are others who see him as the backstabber to the outgoing PM, Boris Johnson. It's a very interesting dynamic Sunak finds himself, because he is getting MP support. I mean, he gets significant names on his ticket. The problem, of course, being is that the membership absolutely loathes him as an individual. And there's the question if he can even win with the membership. I mean, this contest has seen the rise not just of Tugendhat and Penny Mordaunt, but someone like Kimmy Bradnock, who a junior minister who's become very popular with the base as well, for very much speaking a lot of that right-wing, Thatcherite economic, but also social message that it seems that a lot of the conservative base is wanting someone to run on at a high end of leadership for some time. But arguably, the last few Conservative Party prime ministers have not really touched.
Well, the Kemi aspect is interesting because she's not really pieced together her pitch, and I say this because the main pitch for her is that she's anti-identity politics and anti-critical race theory, and anti-trans in some respect with the language. But we know that this isn't really something which is important. I mean, there was a poll that came out that these kind of issues came out side of the top 5 most important issues for Conservative member voters going into this election. So it's really not something that's really picking up too much steam. But then I also hear people who are Conservative members saying that the only reason why they are backing her is because of her race, which I think is a really interesting thing. But she hasn't come up with too many economic policies other than cut taxes and this new thing where she's going to change the nature of the chancellorship, which is somewhat bewildering to me because she's trying to I think put more power to the prime minister in regards to the chancellorship, which, considering the role of the chancellor, the chancellor is effectively your number 2. I mean, we think back to some of the most really iconic chancellors and their relationship with the prime minister. With Thatcher, you had a chancellor, I think it was Geoffrey Howe, who was extremely well connected to Thatcher, and almost until the end, their vision was very similar. Same way with Brown and Blair, and Cameron and Osborne. It's only really recently from May where there was kind of a disparity between the chancellorship and the prime ministerialship. And I think really, if you want to have a keen economic message, changing the nature of the chancellorship isn't the issue. Choosing the right chancellor is the thing you should be aiming for.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing of her idea of breaking up the Treasury, which has only been done once in the 70s by Wilson, which didn't really work. So it's intriguing what her dynamic is there. But yeah, I think her culture, running as an anti-cultural thing, running a lot of what would be a lot of the culture wars in her campaign is intriguing aspect of, because there have been lots of takes, as you mentioned. What do the party membership and MPs care about that? Do they or do they not? I mean, that's also the same issue that seems to be getting hit on Mordaunt's end right now unsuccessfully, is her past views on the trans issue of when she was a minister in government having a view on one thing, and then others, more like the Liz Truss camp and Sunak camps, arguing that she didn't really believe what she believes now. So it's an interesting dynamic to see whether that potentially has a play in with this leadership race.
I have a couple of points to make on Kemi Badenoch, actually. The first is about, what's been said about her race. I think some Tories have a desperate obsession with identity politics. We've had 2 female prime ministers, 2 female leaders. All of the Labour leadership have been white men. It's going to blow their minds that it's a black person, Asian person, woman. And I don't think that really matters so long as they're good. I support candidates whether they're good or not depending on their race. And sure, it would be nice to have to sort of show that progression, especially in the Western world. But at the same time, I'd rather have a white male prime minister who's good than a black woman who's not. And obviously, the Boris Johnson white male has been pretty rubbish. So hopefully, the next prime minister will be good. But there's a massive obsession with that, which I don't necessarily like. But swinging on to what Kemi Badenoch said, and it might be controversial, but I do agree with her. I do feel there should be separate bathrooms, separate toilets for men and women. If they want to have the option of a gender balanced toilet as well, that's fine. But she's tapping into a point which I've seen a lot of people I follow on Twitter, a lot of women who are tired of being called things like uterus havers and those who have periods. Whether it's a super important issue, and especially in the UK, it's maybe more of an issue in America. fine. And I did tweet the other day saying I think it's more important to talk about the cost of living, but at the same time I hate being called a uterus helper. So that's a very interesting point that she's tapped into, and I think it's ahead of the curve because in Britain we seem to import American culture wars, and that's going to be the next big culture war in the UK.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Framing. I think this whole field, is really. I forget which journalist made the point. It's very much the Cameron legacy of trying to change what was the image of the Conservative Party that used to be in the 90s and the 80s of the nasty party of old white men into much more diversified party that's much more reflection, as you will, maybe the newer society. But no, it's intriguing, of course, the culture war aspect that is getting touched because of certain candidates in this contest have been much more open about talking about the culture wars, and others have been a little more avoidative of that issue. Of course, there really hasn't been a lot of conversation about policy in this so far of the leadership campaign. It's been more of a framing of who's best to lead the country and the Conservative Party after the mess that was the end of the Boris Johnson premiership.
Well, I think that really is one of the biggest issues of this campaign, is that there's been a real lack of focus on policy. I mean, Tom Tugendhat said in a 1-minute video, I've got a 10-year plan, without actually detailing what's involved in this 10-year plan. And I think that's one of the biggest issues, that, all these candidates have said, I'm the best person, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, without actually detailing how that's going to be achieved, which I think is really the biggest issue, is that you can have all the rhetoric in the world, but if you've got no substance, what's really the point? And I think that's the biggest issue I'm currently having. Lots of people here currently talking about the culture war, and as I've already said, polling suggests that no one particularly cares about it. At the end of the day, when you're having issues with crime, the economy's not doing very well, immigration is an important topic people care about. Talking about this, it's not the place all the time. That you have to really, if you want to understand and get people to vote for you, you actually have to present a vision for people to vote for. And I think that was the biggest issue. And I did an article about this, about the end of the Johnson period, and generally just how there wasn't, outside of Brexit, much of a vision. And I think that the next leader needs to really put out what the actual belief is, because it's been a very long time since a Conservative has really gone out there with a ideological framework to govern.
I think you've got a very good point about people being seen to be working on culture war on both sides. And if you look at Sadiq Khan, for example, his Twitter, he's, made a very big point about him being a Muslim, but also, he's very accepting of women, LGBT, etc. And he seems to hammer that a lot in his Twitter account. And the replies are almost always universally, what are you doing about crime? What are you doing about knife crime? Teenage boys getting stabbed in London. He seems to care more about the prettiness of Twitter than, teenage lads getting stabbed. And I think it can probably be the same on the other side, people being obsessed with culture war when there's other issues. So you've definitely got a point there about people caring more about, I think they care more about being seen to do something than actually doing something. It doesn't matter what their policies are. If you're seen to be a certain way, then people will lap it up. Because a lot of the time, policies don't affect people.
And the interesting, I think, dynamic, of course, is whoever gets this job on September 5th has a long road ahead of them. The Conservative Party currently has problems in its ancestral heartlands, the Blue Wall, with the Lib Dems marching in a lot of these historically safe Conservative seats, but also the Conservatives have this issue of holding on to the red wall. So I think it's an interesting dynamic of whichever one of these six win, more than likely, Sunak, Morton, or Truss, how they have to play off that dynamic because of the issues, both incredibly the Conservatives are running into of trying to negate, trying to hold that balance between two different parts of the country that see each other with sort of a different eye, which is one of the challenges I think the next Conservative leader has and Prime Minister has to deal with, is trying to keep the coalition at the best they can whole.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible challenge for the Conservatives, and I was talking to an Oxford academic earlier today, which I'm gonna edit up and then send to hopefully publish on Election Daily. But it's interesting because really and utterly to keep the coalition together was more of a challenge than probably most coalitions needing to stay together, because you had, traditional voters that had pretty much no links to each other outside of Brexit coming together. But if they really want to keep this idea, this principle of their last election, what they actually need to do, the first thing is actually impose a lot of their manifesto that they had. You know, we heard countlessly about nurses and about more hospitals and about leveling up, but especially the latter is so ill-defined by most politicians that if you ask local government councillors or anything like that, they still have no idea what they mean. But more than that, what they have to do is just not be as selective as they're doing. How many times did you hear in 2020 that the Conservatives were only putting resources into conservative areas that voted Conservative, as a way to kind of play politics? The reality is that if you want to achieve well regard in the eyes of the people, you can't be seen to be playing politics. We saw that when Brown in 2007 was playing politics with an election. People don't respond well to it, and you have to actually, first of all, define what your intention is with your vision and then actually impose it. That's the only way they're going to actually make ground on Labour.
I also think it's important how they're going to be with foreign leaders, because I'm personally one of these people who think what foreign leaders think doesn't matter at all. I really don't care as much as what I think they're doing for the UK. But we've seen how Boris Johnson's got an excellent relationship with Zelensky. So are they going to be people who are going to be pushing for trade deals with Australia and emerging economies like Brazil and Indonesia? Or are we sort of going to go down a more sort of niche route of only certain countries? I mean, if you look, for example, the death of Shinzo Abe, Donald Trump put out a statement way before Biden did. He did genuinely seem to like him, and that was beneficial for the American Japanese relationship. So it's also about working with other countries with trade deals, especially in a post-Brexit world, because Europe hasn't got the money or the might that quite a lot of nations have outside of the EU.
I mean, let's not remember we still have the American trade deal to finalize and sort out. And I think trade deals like that are going to be extremely important with how the way things go forward, in terms of governance. But I think that really obviously it's important that we have a good relationship with the EU in terms of making sure that people who are struggling financially to get the things that they used to be able to get in terms of resources, and stock for their businesses are able to get that more cleanly. Um, but it's important, I think, more so that the government imposes a strong domestic agenda. The cost of living crisis is an international thing, but this government's in the jurisdiction of this country, and it's important that there's a focus on sorting out, making sure that inflation goes down, making sure that people really, especially this winter with the projected increase of energy prices, people are able to afford heating and what people would deem as the basic necessities. And if they're able to do that in a very short period of time, which they're going to have, I think you'll see the Conservative Party rise up again. Because we have to remember that the current polls aren't a reflection of Labour doing well; they're a reflection of disappointment in the Conservative government, especially in their standards of integrity and really naturally lawfulness. And so, if a new Prime Minister shows constructive government, we should see a seismic rise for them. They're not going to be what they are now, which is around 15% down on Labour, if irrespective of who gets in, but they could be able to be in a position where they might be looking to have a strong next general election, which a couple of months ago seemed extremely unlikely.
And the Conservative Party is sort of seen as the party that is best with the economy versus, Labour, it seems to be better with public services. So they've sort of got a reputation which they seem to be in tatters. But a bad economy, it can kill a campaign. Look at, Bush Senior, who was so popular after the Gulf War. The economy went down, taxes were raised, boom, he was out. Jimmy Carter, Gordon Brown. I mean, obviously, the 2008 crisis was, everywhere, but we saw sort of George Bush as well, and the Republicans losing quite badly to Obama. So, exactly that. It's an international problem, but it is our jurisdiction, and people aren't going to care about Ukraine as much as they're caring about how much Lurpak's gone up, for example.
A very niche British reference, I think that is.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think the interesting dynamic of whoever gets this is the relationship, obviously, with Europe. I mean, there's still the contentious Northern Ireland Protocol bill that all of them candidates have said they endorse. So how that goes down with the EU and the Biden White House, which has made itself particularly clear that it supports Ireland in this dispute about that will be an interesting test of the next prime minister, whoever that may be. But it's also a good, interesting test, of course, of what the next prime minister faces is just the tests they do, because it's not a rosy period whoever wins this job runs into. They have an economy in trouble, a war in Europe that still isn't reaching any conclusions with Ukraine, and in a potential energy crisis this winter with potentially Russia shutting off the last remaining parts of gas in the continent. So it's not a fun time to get into government, and obviously they're trailing in the polls, and no government ever likes to trail in the polls at this stage, but it's not impossible for whoever wins it to make a comeback. It's just going to be a long road ahead for whoever has to take this job, more than likely a Sunak or more than a Truss.
Well, I like to think that the war in Europe is kind of overplayed a bit, because obviously it's a very important issue in terms of the politics of Europe. But at the same time, I think people aren't as, really nicely, we're not at war. We're supporting Ukraine. We are. But there's been no declaration of war from Britain or from NATO. And I think that's, an important dynamic, that because we're not at war, and people kind of attitude is that we are at war, that I don't think it's going to play out in such a extensive way as people assume. I mean, one of the biggest things about Boris, which people kind of spoke about as a defense, was he has a very positive relationship with Zelensky, which he did, and Ukraine were extremely in favor of him as a prime minister. But at the same time, he had, extraordinarily bad personal ratings. I think his net at one point was -59, which is extraordinarily low. I don't think Ukraine is going to be as influential as many of the pundits assume it is. Yeah, that's kind of my take on that. I don't know if Sarah agrees or disagrees.
Obviously, foreign policy, again, sort of for our American listeners, if you look how, George Bush Sr. is more positively thought of for his handling of the Gulf War, because, I mean, a war is never good, but he handled it probably as well as anybody could. But LBJ, who had such a landmark domestic program, was killed by Vietnam because all these young boys getting slaughtered halfway around the world for something that really didn't affect America that much. But as you said, while Ukraine affects us in some ways, it's not our country. It's not our boys and girls going to die there. So, yeah, obviously it's been promoted, but the war in Ukraine isn't going to last forever. Hopefully it's over soon. It might last longer, but I doubt it's going to last absolutely forever.
But no, I think the economic challenges that whoever wins this is a test to their the Tory party's record of economic management, which arguably the last year and a half has seen go into the tank, being now in charge of an economic downturn. But it will be, I think, quite a test of a lot of these candidates are running.
I would actually like to break. I would like to break the news that Jeremy Hunt has officially endorsed Rishi Sunak.
He has.
Yes, which was not the expectation. The expectation was that he'd possibly go to Tom Tugendhat.
But it's maybe more
But
likely
Jeremy,
Rishi's going to get over the finish line, though, isn't it, I guess?
So that
well,
probably.
yeah,
Mhm.
but we should caveat with this is that Grant Shapps obviously endorsed Rishi Sunak. Now, obviously, not all of the people who publicly endorsed Grant Shapps have republicly endorsed, but the four that have, none of them have gone to Sunak. So I think that's an important thing to state, that this does not mean that a considerable amount of Hunt's lot are going to go there as well.
No, but it's a significant endorsement for Sunak, probably something he needed, especially with the bad day it has been for his campaign in terms of narratives. Of saying someone of the party has already endorsed someone senior in Hunt's case, which of course is probably, in retrospect, isn't a surprise that Hunt probably went to Sunak, considering ideologically where they're at in the party. But obviously, him not endorsing Tugendhat is a big, big blow to Tom Tugendhat's campaign. They were really, by all accounts, wanting that endorsement, and most of what Hunt's MPs and Saware's MPs. Obviously, there remains to be seen the final impact, but this is probably not the news if you're the Tugendhat campaign that you probably wanted to hear going into tomorrow's vote.
Though, to be fair, Jeremy Hunt isn't exactly popular in membership, so his endorsement might not mean the world apart from MPs, but when you're in the final two.
Well, there's another side of it, which is, I mean, I don't really think you can really call Rishi Sunak one of the moderates. I mean, before this tax hike, people saw him as more of a Thatcherite economically. Yeah. It seemed to be that he only did it specifically to pay for the furlough scheme and all the massive health and NHS investments that he had to do. So I don't think that it's going to be a case that this massively is an ideological position. I assume this just means that Rishi Sunak has made a promise to Jeremy Hunt. It's not on ideological grounds, and I think that this certainly may ruin the already tattered reputation of Jeremy Hunt. Though I think in some regard, Jeremy Hunt had sort of started to repair it, going back on a lot of the things that he had already done in government. But I think that this is people.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt. I think Hunt wants a cabinet job, and he thinks that Sunak is the best able area where he can get a cabinet job. So there's the main reason why he didn't take a job with Boris Johnson 3 years ago, which feels odd to say. It's only 3 years since the last leadership election was happening, because he was offered a job that was in a demotion in his mind, since he wanted to keep his prior job, which was the foreign secretary's post. So it'd be intriguing to see what probable offers were made. It's an endorsement Sunak, will take, and we'll see where the MPs who endorsed Hunt go. I mean, one, Daniel Kaczynski, was on Sky earlier this morning and afternoon in the UK, and said he was pretty much endorsing Morton. So already some divergence there of what was the Hunt team. But no, it's intriguing. Of course,
I do think it's important. Sorry, I do think it's important to note that I don't think Sunak is going to get many transfers, because if you already, Sunak is really Marmite, and those that already like him would have backed him, and so because it's highly likely, especially as he's the front runner in this regard, that he's going to get he's not going to get many transfers, which I think this actually probably boosts up Penny Mordaunt more, because if Hunt, let's say, had gone with Truss, I think that would have been a lot more dangerous for her than if he had gone with Sunak.
Yeah, and I mean, on the point of Truss, I mean, the big question with her now is what happens with the right wing of the Tory party's vote, because there's the argument very much in play that she's very much getting hurt by the splitting of the right wing vote 3 different ways between herself, Badenoch, and Braverman, which of course is now why she's only got 50 votes, which according to all media reports was a disappointing result for what they were expecting, and only is ahead of Kenny Badenoch by 10 votes. So I think that's a good. It's an intriguing dynamic, especially more than likely should Braverman be eliminated tomorrow on that vote. Does the right start to unify around Truss, or do they still split around? I mean, there have been rumors as well that Kemi Badenoch might not actually even endorse Truss should she be voted out. That the rumor is that she's more of a Sunak person. But again, these are just rumors. But it's intriguing to see where these dynamics go as candidates start to drop out and where their supporters go with.
You've also got to factor in what the MPs personally think of the candidates. If they know them, if they are friends with them, if they like them, if they don't like them. I mean, they may put it aside for the sake of the party and the country, but if you really don't like somebody, you won't want them to be prime minister. Mm-hmm. And I don't know really many. I mean, I've only met Liz Truss at an event, but she was late and didn't take questions, which we were promised would happen. So black mark in that book. But
politicians being late to their events still all across both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, so it depends on reputation. Like, is Jeremy Hunt liked by his colleagues? Is Kemi Badenoch, Rishi Sunak? Are they, what's their relationship like with it's like in America, everyone knows Ted Cruz is absolutely hated in the Senate. So what's the equivalent over here?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Mordaunt has got this incredible power of uniting factions. I mean, you can't have Sir Mike Penning and Michael Fabricant in the same cluster in any ordinary standings, but right now they're both backing Mordaunt. So I think that the idea that the right will specifically unite behind Truss. A was an ex-Remainer, and B is an ex-Republican, and C an ex-Lib Dem. Like, do I really think the right is gonna, as a cluster, rally behind her?
She's not even that right wing.
She's not even that right wing.
So I don't see why. She might be to the right of the others, but she's not that right wing.
Right. I mean, she's not that right wing, but she might be what, in the eyes of them, might be enough to get their ideology on the ballot, which, of course, depends.
I don't even think that, because, I mean, here's the question: are you going to back someone who's got a historic anti-traditional conservative values, who sure may have changed their mind on these things, but has spoken at an opposing party's conference, or are you going to back someone who's got pretty much the most dream scenario for you in terms of rhetoric of history, being a carer whose mum died very young, had to make a business to support her family. It's very conservative in nature, and also has the backing of quite some high profile conservatives. I mean, David Davis, for example, is supporting Mordaunt, which is a massive endorsement, especially on the right.
Spokesman.
Exactly. So I think we need to dispel this idea that the right is going to specifically go behind Truss. I think you could see a number of them spill behind Mordaunt.
Yeah, I mean, I won't deny the fact I think Mordaunt's run a very good campaign so far. I mean, Liz Truss has not really run a campaign, if one can even call her campaign a campaign. I mean, there has been no formal announcement. They were late. I think they were one of the last of the serious ones to jump in. And it's been very messy on their end, which is probably why they're in the position where they are of not having good control. But yeah, I think, I will say, Mordaunt has a very good background. I mean, first in her family university, her mother dying, serving in the armed forces, having that dynamic approach of having people across the party spectrum endorse her is what probably is why she's, I will say it at the moment, probably the front runner to win the Tory party leadership. Barring any dark arts of MPs deciding to keep her off the ballot, which I'm doubtful they'd do that. But then again, it's a Conservative Party leadership election, so anything's quite possible. As we know, if there's one thing Sir Gavin Williamson, the numbers man as they call him, loves to do, it's having fun with these leadership contests.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's the one who kind of came out saying the team Sunak have kind of just given a couple of people to other candidates to keep them in, which is really interesting considering the fact that Hunt went backwards. I've no idea in any other circumstance how you go backwards, but apparently he did. So I mean, who knows what's going on behind the scenes?
Maybe they just don't like him.
Well, why would you back someone and then say, do you know what? The next day I'm not feeling it anymore. It's like,
But
It's
because I
it's
think there's a
really
lot of
weird.
pressure to endorse straight away because they had to endorse in order to get
Probably
ahead of the
trying,
thing.
They didn't have to. They didn't have to publicly endorse.
True.
A lot. The point. A lot of them haven't. I mean, compared to the public endorsements, both Morden and Sunak have 30 or more people
right.
who haven't publicly endorsed them.
I mean,
So
my
I mean,
MP, she's like a massive Boris Johnson fan. She's not publicly announced. I have no idea, but
Isn't
she's
she also the PPS currently, the Prime Minister, if I recall correctly?
exactly. So I don't have a clue what she thinks. So she's probably not going to put Sunak because he did stab old Boris in the back, in her opinion.
Right.
So.
I don't think anyone who probably still the PPS is a Boris, the three PPSs. I doubt they're giving Mr. Sunak anything but some fun choice of words that I can't say on the stream.
Well, Truss does seem to be the continuity of Boris, which is really interesting considering the background. You don't get Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg without, Boris Johnson kind of saying, I think this is the person we need to rally behind.
Right. I mean, it's hilarious that, Liz Truss, of all people, is the now Boris candidate, considering, as you mentioned, prior times of Liz Truss's career, she has been seen on the liberal wing of the Conservative Party, very much a Cameronite when she entered Parliament and got into the cabinet the first time. So it's intriguing to see the dynamic of someone like Liz Truss, who has historically been on the liberal end of the Tory party, now seen as the quote-unquote candidate of the right.
Yeah, it's so. I think it's really emblematic of how the Conservative Party has shifted since being in government. I mean, she's someone I think 5 years ago I said to one of my friends is going to be Prime Minister, and they laughed at me. And now we're in a conversation where there's a realistic possibility she might be, which just shows the extent of her rise. And really, her rise was through Boris, which is why I think she's so being the Boris candidate. I mean, we talked about Penny Mordaunt going out and speaking before Hunt. Truss was the person who spoke before Boris, which I think really shows the dynamic of their relationship and how she's personally involved within the party.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an intriguing dynamic of Truss and Morden, very much being elected in 2010, being of that 2010 class, but very much taking two different career routes in terms of where they've gone. I mean, Morden had her fast rise to politics, then very much got it abruptly ended when Boris took over and became a junior minister. In Truss's case, she's had her in line at cabinet positions, but then being the foreign secretary has really put her in that leadership position because she's been able to, along with now the former outgoing PM Boris, take a large leadership stage on Ukraine, which has made her popular with a good chunk of the grassroots and MPs.
I mean, I'd be interested to hear what Sarah thinks about the development of Truss within the last 10 years.
Yeah, well, she's never been someone I've been like a huge fan of. I don't dislike her by any means, but I have MPs that I think are more interesting. But I can see why you'd see her as Prime Minister material. She seems to have, there's some people, you might not feel like them, but they have that ambition, that drive that makes you think they'll be Prime Minister one day. So, I mean, I'd vote for her over Sunak. She's probably higher up in the list than other people, but when it comes down to it, if it's Liz and Rishi in the final two, I might spoil my ballot again, because I spoiled my ballot for 2019 leadership election because I didn't like Johnson, but I didn't like Hunt either, so I just couldn't vote for them.
We now have the first Tory voter publicly to tell us their ballot. Just kidding.
Well, I do think that Truss and Rishi is probably the worst case scenario, because you have Truss who, many people, especially in the North, have said will never carry the North in any way, which was obviously the plan for the Conservatives, and Rishi, who, I mean, Labour have already tried to position the Conservatives as it's not Boris, it's a whole lot.
Right.
And the fact that Rishi's also got a fine, I think
he's also really, very rich.
He would be if he were to be elected the wealthiest prime minister of all time.
Yeah, and his wife obviously had the Nom-Dom status debacle.
You had Visagate with him as well.
Yeah, he's certainly not had the smoothest road during the last couple of years.
I think in the UK, people don't like success as much as the Americans do, which is a point my dad makes a lot. That in America, they're much more accepting of the middle class. They admire wealth, like
Oh,
people
yeah.
like Donald Trump, even though he started off fairly wealthy, which by no means, but they love a rags to riches story. They love people getting richer. Whereas here, where I think we're very envious of the very wealthy, I don't think it makes me like Rishi Sunak or dislike him more if he's rich, but he can hardly can say that he's come from nothing. You know,
Yeah.
he went to Stanford and all these elite schools. His father-in-law is very, very wealthy, so it might work in America, but it's not working here.
Right.
Well, there's certain, I think, with the working class, which, as compared to America, where pretty much everyone who emigrated there was the working class. Here, there's a lot more ingrained bitterness towards the aristocracy and the elite in the country. And so because of that, a lot of people feel like when they look at the prime minister, they want to, see themselves, even though, back when prime minister started, no one was working class
They
in
were all
parliament, let
earls and
alone.
dukes.
Exactly.
It's like the early presidents, all until Andrew Jackson were from the landed gentry, from plantations and old money.
Right. I mean, in the case of PMs, I mean, if you go back for most of British history, most PMs have been Etonians. They're all, Etonians who were born in the right places, went to the right schools, all rich and were born into that position of power. More and more, I think a lot of the electorate as a whole wants to move away from that legacy. Of course, that's a legacy that the Conservative Party, for most of its history, has been associated with. Most recently with, Boris Johnson and David Cameron both being, Etonians, very much born into a generational wealth. But yeah, I mean, it is intriguing to see someone like Sunak. I mean, it is also just intriguing to point out with this field that, I mean, most of these MPs represent wealthy seats for a party that, is trying to become more appealing to the working class. I mean, Sunak represents a traditionally blue ribbon Tory seat. I mean, it's the seat that is, made William Hague.
I do think it's important to note that the Conservative seats aren't necessarily the most wealthy seats,
but they need to be safe. They need to be a safe seat. You don't want your leader to be thrown out.
Well, right. I'm just saying the dynamic of what these seats are just is intriguing to that wealthy dynamic. Mm-hmm.
Well, a seat like Richmond York isn't necessarily an extraordinarily wealthy seat. It's just an extremely rural seat, and generally in rural areas, that's where that's where you see the Conservatives really doing well, as opposed to what you're actually seeing is in a lot of middle class wealthy seats, the Conservatives doing worse.
Right.
An example of that is Kensington, which also has been flip flopping the last few years, and that's just because you're seeing the middle classes and the lower upper classes kind of moving towards Labour or the Liberal Democrats in an extremely weird way, which I guess is what the result of Brexit kind of resulted in.
Well, I mean, just on that note about seats changing, I mean, one of the people running is a perfect example of this. I mean, Jeremy Hunt's seat is something that has been changing rather fast from a very Tory safe seat in Surrey to now he only holds it by 14%, and I believe by current polling would be in danger of losing his seat. So it's that dynamic of the Shire is very much changing. And some, underneath.
Same with Dominic Raab. If Boris Johnson hadn't have decided to resign and lasted, it was conceivable that the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister would have both lost their seats. Which is, think about that within political context. That's never really happened before. The closest we come to it was really Ed Balls losing. Oh, and he wasn't even in government, but
I mean, Ed Balls. I mean, the closest. I mean, in terms of what? There's the Michael Portillo moment, but he was, the heir to the throne in that case.
But they've got to decide. So who they want to court. Are you going to go for the, moderate people in the Conservative shires who don't want any houses built, sort of have a veneer of respectability, or do you want to go for the red wall who are culturally and socially more conservative on views about things like race and Brexit? I think you've got to decide who you want to cut, who's more likely to turn out, who's more beneficial to have.
And I mean, I think the problem that I think the outgoing government did is they tried appealing to both and just did it horrendously to both sides. I think it was trying to appeased both sides, and very much no one bought it, and just thought they're just full of extras.
Oh, you can say what you like on the British side, but I know you Americans are quite fussy about swearing, as I've been told on previous podcasts. But I've always been warned: you can say everything you like, that isn't a swear word.
I would say it, but I don't want the bosses at Decision Desk, to give me an angry email for swearing on a podcast. So I will stick to the American here. If I were in the UK, I'd happily, be a little more candid.
I mean, here's the thing: is the electoral strategy of the Conservatives.
Right.
I think there are certain seats which are gone. We can already agree. Wickham,
Right.
Steve Baker seat, it's gone. No, even when it was extremely good polling for the Conservatives, Model still said that's flipping. We can say gone. Fine.
It's a long-term Labour seat.
It's not. It's traditionally Conservative Wickham.
Well,
It's
no, I'm
never
saying in
gone
the long
anything
run
but-
because of the political
okay.
trends.
Sorry, yes, you're right. Yeah, long term, it's probably going to be a Labour seat. Steve Baker is not going to appeal to that seat anymore.
Mhm.
So there's other seats probably gone. South Cambridgeshire probably going to go to the Lib Dems. We forget about that. Eastbourne or Eastleigh, that's it. Probably gone as well. But the Conservatives really need to, understand what won them the race.
Mhm.
If they're going to go for the North, which is what they did to win, and what in 2017 was their strategy as well, to flip the North. Doing what they've done for the last few years isn't going to do that, because I don't think there's been much of an attempt to appeal to the North, other than we got Brexit done, hooray!
Right,
And they've used COVID as an excuse, like, we can't do anything because of COVID.
Right,
That's basically
the other
default excuse
problem.
for everything.
The problem I think you run into with the North is that leveling up. It's a great term to say leveling up, but what does that actually imply?
Well, ironically, the only person who's actually made an attempt to define it is Jeremy Hunt, which he wrote in his newspaper talking about how he thinks leveling up is that someone from Blackpool or Bolton doesn't have to move away to get a job, which I think is pretty much fundamental to it. My girlfriend is from Bolton, and she always says how miserable she feels that she's probably going to have to move up to London to get into the career she wants to go into. And I think that's fundamental. But, I don't think levelling up can just be a northern agenda, which is what it's made out to be, northern and somewhat Midlands. Places like Crawley, for example, which have Conservative roots for sure, did nearly flip in 2017 to Labour. But seats like that, like Aldershot, these are places that also can't be forgotten. We always imagine the working class to be, rough northerners, but there are a considerable amount of working class in the south who also feel as if they have been left behind. Exactly, which is why you're starting to get this. Wait, you're focusing on the north. What about us? You're not thinking about us as well, which is why I think a considerable amount of the so-called blue wall is moving away from the Conservatives.
And they say coastal cities and coastal areas are one of the most deprived, and you get those all over the country. So that might be a good one for them to focus on.
I mean, Southend is a perfect example. Of seats. Obviously, there was the tragic death of David Amess in the by-election there. But generally, it was thought of that there would be a possibility if David Amess had, if it was a different way that he was leaving, that Labour could have pushed more of a swing there and actually looked to have made it a really close margin or even taken it. So, what the Conservatives need to realise is that you can't just target areas, because that's what they have been doing. They said, we're going to focus on northern seats that flipped because we want to keep them, so we're going to give them all the goodies. And Andy Burnham said, you can't do that. You can't play politics with people's lives. And I think that the new Conservative leader really needs to learn that there needs to be a more widespread application of their vision and, what levelling up essentially is.
And they've also got to look at demographics, because they were really pushing for Batley and Spen, obviously not in the election after Joe Cox was killed, but later on. But the seat has a quite high Muslim majority, and as ethnic minorities get more prosperous, they tend to lean more conservative because they have conservative views on social issues. They're very extremely family oriented people who you think would be ripe for the picking for the Conservatives. However, they generally still stick to Labour for multiple reasons. because their ancestors, they would always vote Labour. So if they sort of improve the quality of life for non-whites and non-Christians, I think they have a good shot at stealing demographics. And I think an example of this our American followers can understand is Hispanics in America are I'm not saying they're going to completely go to Republican, are leaning more Republican. I mean, culturally, again, very family oriented. They have probably a fair amount of views in common. Just because they're immigrants doesn't mean they're going to agree with the Democrats on immigration. But I still think the Republicans can't take that vote for granted. But when you got Jill Biden talking about breakfast tacos, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not even getting over that. That was ridiculous.
I mean, that was the most white stereotype of Hispanics I think I could find from Joe Biden. But anyway, but no, I think
interesting that. Sorry, it is really interesting. You bring up Batley in Spain, which if we remember back to 2021, that was a really good time polling wise for the Conservatives, and everyone really thought they should have taken it. And I think that we was talking about the issue started with Partygate. I think that's really where the electoral issues kind of was suggested, because let's not forget, not after that they also lost, or just before that even, they also lost Chesham and Mamersham, which really
they lost it on the same night they won in Hartlepool.
Yeah, it was very close to Hartlepool. So I think it is extremely interesting how difficult the electoral map is for the Conservatives, but equally it's really difficult for Labour, because they've got to achieve something that hasn't really happened since 1945 or something, in terms of like the
swing to get together.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, it's only really been now with a 15-point lead where they seem to have a comfortable majority. But obviously, probably 15% probably isn't going to last, is it? Let's be honest.
Right. You would imagine a new Conservative leader probably gets back a lot of the folks who moved to the unknowns.
There's going to be a bounce. We know that no matter who it is, there's going to be a bounce where people are keen to see how that goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting in terms of the dynamics, the leveling up, this, and demographics as well. I mean, of what the future of UK politics is and what the Conservative Party has to do. I mean, obviously leveling up, in the party's history is something that the Conservatives can do. They've done it back in the long periods of the past. I mean, there's an arguable point, by a certain wing of it, the party, the One Nation wing. There's a One Nation, value of the McMullen, Super PAC, investment scheme. But yeah, I mean, it's an intriguing dynamic because it is a party, I think, very much, trying to navigate the realignment of politics that we have seen slowly globally, of working class voters becoming much more right-leaning and more educated voters becoming more left-leaning. The dynamic change of, 40 years ago, we were having this conversation on British politics, it'd be the inverse. Educated voters would be, rock-solid Tory voters, and more working-class voters were more traditional Labour voters. So it's now the dynamic that a lot of politicians, who grew up, with a certain view of how the world operated, have to change it to. And I think, you have the problem, for the Tories of how do you balance out one part of the country's dynamics with another part of the country's dynamics, when the two have historically been at, opposite ends of, the table. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's important for them to learn their lessons.
Right.
When Thatcher deindustrialized the North, and then left it alone without really invigorating its economy with something else, that's really where you really at that point lost the core North. Right. I mean, we were coming from in 1983, Darlington nearly went Conservative. It was very close, and then you're coming after this kind of thing, and then you're nowhere near any of that area. And it's only really, it's taken 30 years for them to get close in these areas again. And, it's important that they learn the lessons. They don't simply just leave these areas to just rot.
Right.
And you do invest, you take, and obviously this is coming from not an ideological position, but you do take the approach of, the One Nation ethos of moving the country together forward, because a lot of people just see this country as London-centric economy.
Right.
I think that if they're gonna, bring these voters continue with them, they have to try to start to change that narrative.
Yeah, and I think the Conservatives should take a lesson from Labour of what happens when you take your voters for granted. And over time, the resentment builds up. I mean, Labour was the dominant party in Scotland for decades until it all imploded there. Same in the North. So, I mean, you have to treat your voters, with what they want, which is, an attentive position of frontline policy. Of course, both of you live in the North and would know.
I do not live in the North. I live in the South.
Oh,
I have lived in the North, but that's okay.
My deepest apologies.
To be fair, I did live in the North for a year for uni, so I will let you off because that was probably the last.
I send my apologies to the Southerner here. I will donate my $10 paycheck to you for my apologies. As the Northerner on this call, as Sarah being the one who was in a red wall seat that I believe had not flipped Tory in decades.
For since the 1800s or something ridiculous.
It's very much those are the type of seats the Conservatives very much now have to try and keep in a good place, or else they may run into the same problem that Labour ran into with those seats, that people said why vote for something that doesn't change our way of life.
I mean, obviously there is a lot of American listeners on here, so I want to sort of translate it in a way that they would understand, similar to how I would want it. Is you compare it to the Rust Belt, because you were obviously Reagan swept it all in the 80s, but he was sort of an anomaly in that he was very, very good at getting votes. These people have been Democrats for decades. They're union people through and through, steel workers, and as the economy winded down, their economy, nothing sort of changed for them. Obama saw a quite good economy, but they were passed over. So come 2016, you would have thought, oh well, it's going to be a slam dunk for the Democrats. But when you've got Hillary Clinton, not Wisconsin, when you've got her telling her how.
Oh, your audio's gone. Oh.
It's completely. I have no idea what happened then.
Well, it seems no good Wi-Fi is trucking again. I didn't say that.
Hopefully we'll get.
My phone keeps doing on voice control, so I'm doing my headphones. Sorry about that.
It's fine. You were talking in Wisconsin.
Yeah, but back to it, and joking about coal miners, and they're probably thinking, she's this woman who doesn't care about us. She's this New York elitist. She went to Yale, whatever, Wellesley. Smart woman, but she doesn't care about us. Donald Trump, billionaire, went to Ivy League as well. Probably never really spent much time in the middle America. But they thought, he's different. He says it like it is. He wants to protect our jobs. We don't care that he's stinking rich. We'll vote for him. And it worked because he actually paid attention to them and tapped into that white working class in the same way Boris did. Unfortunately, it didn't save him in 2020, but I think if COVID hadn't have happened, maybe he would have won. I don't know.
No, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic that white working, working class coalition, Trump and Boris both created. I mean, it's now intriguing to see. I mean, with the leadership being in this case, which of these candidates try, and can hold it the best. I mean, obviously. On paper, of course, the only northern seat, even though I know it's not a northern seat by most technicality standards, would be Sunak's seat. But, of course, Sunak is a man who his background doesn't really scream as someone who would appeals to the North. The ex-Goldman Sachs banker who went to all the preppy schools, the Stanfords and the Oxfords.
And he's not charismatic.
Well, he's also not charismatic. Yes, he's also boring. He's basically.
I may say, how many of them are charismatic? I mean, we know that Mordaunt's a good speaker, but I wouldn't call her. I'd call her the most charismatic out of them. I would call, because she's got humor at least. But,
oh no, I mean, Mordaunt's probably the best speaker of them, but I think if you put them as a scale of charismatic speakers, I think none of them are someone who could go in a room and absolutely dominate that room. They'd probably just be just the person you listen to, and it's like, yeah, I listen to them. shrug.
Mm.
And exactly that, I think there's also a danger with going for a boring candidate, as we saw in America with 2020. I think a lot of people thought we'll go for Biden because he's more secure on maybe, COVID. He's been in politics since, Obama was in middle school, for example. Such like a huge illustrious history in the Senate and as vice president. But, he's reached like disapproval ratings that Trump would have never. He's obviously, I'm not American. I only sort of see what's on the news and what people are saying, but he's not popular at all. And the midterm's going to be a bloodbath.
I don't think you can attribute that specifically to his boringness, though. I think you can,
No, it's
Exactly.
not
the
his
reality
boringness. It's the fact that people voted for him because he was steady.
Well, look, I think a lot of people voted
for him because he wasn't Trump. If
Exactly.
we're perfectly honest.
Well, I mean, he
But
wasn't Trump,
it's
and he
not-
was on paper. He was the stable guy who generally was a normal person who would be a normal president. The jury, of course, is still out on there. Of course, I have my view that he hasn't been a good president, but to their own on that. But I think, with this field, I mean, there's a lot of the MPs very much who want to do an anti-Boris. I mean, Boris, to his credit, was a very charismatic, individual who was an election winner in everything he'd done, but could not govern. And I think there's a big push among the MPs to try and get someone normal who can just speak as a prime minister and just do the governing job right. Now, whether
boring isn't necessarily bad because
it's not.
One of the greatest, and this is not just an opinion. It's historians have consistently put this person as one of the top prime ministers in history. Is a man by the name of William Pitt the Younger, who is one of the most longest lasting prime ministers as well. But he was categorically known as one of the most boring people in politics. As opposed to the eccentric rival Charles James Fox. But he's but what did Fox amount to? He was nothing. He was a minister for a few years in a couple of governments. But boring doesn't necessarily mean, and we need to make sure that we change the dynamic. But
I just think it's a risk. I'm not saying that boring is a bad thing, and I agree about Pitt and sort of Clement.
I mean, look, I think any new leader, I think, especially the fact that whoever takes over, assuming there's an election in 2024, is going to have 14 years of conservative government. There's only so much freshness you can do before people just say, you're just the same thing.
But after 9 years of government, they got their most seats. So
right. Now, to be fair, that was Jeremy Corbyn, to be fair, leading Labour.
But Keir Starmer isn't the most,
well-regarded
person.
Right.
But, if you're able to have a clear domestic agenda and fulfill your targets, you will probably win the next election.
Right.
I mean, that's my fundamental belief about this.
Well, look, I think they can win the next general election. Of course, they have to get the job of governing, which the last prime minister, Boris Johnson, didn't do right. Right. I mean, if the economy recovers and they do, put their agenda items, because let's be quite candid, nothing that the Conservatives ran on in 2019 outside of Brexit has been enacted. None of their reform policies they touted as a big deal have been enacted. I mean, outside of Brexit, what's the major legacy since the election? A PM resigning because he was a moron?
I mean, I think that Boris is going to be someone who people kind of need to take a fresh breath,
right,
separate themselves from, and I think. Actually, perhaps being a boring candidate is probably the best way to do that. But it depends the type of way you're boring. If you're boring as if you're like the John Major boring, you're monotone, you don't really have, much of a thing. I mean, there was a thing he said about Splitting Image, is that Splitting Image really, Peter Castle was really grey, and he'd sit there and just have pea soup, and he was just gobsmacked saying, I don't even like pea soup. What are they on about? But, he had this image of just boring, and you compare that to Blair, who's eccentric. But you can be a positive boring,
of course,
in a way that you're certainly stable. You're not going to make any mistakes, and I was going to say a British term, which I don't think would be good for American
Oh,
audiences.
I think our American audience would like it if it's not going to get me. As long as the decision does.
Well, it will get you. It would get you in trouble, which is why I refrained. But if they're a good enough speaker on their own without having this eccentric personality, I think that that's going to be quite positive for them.
Yeah, and I mean, I would imagine, whoever wins this contest, most of them will probably try and make a big push for the return of cabinet government, a more stronger cabinet, and much more, stronger number 10 operation. Because let's be quite candid, one of the biggest failings that Boris Johnson had was that he didn't have a proper number 10, operation. It was just very much, just on anarchy, to put it candidly. But no, I think. Boring, I don't think is terrible. I mean, it's just you just have to have the like anything. I think any new choice of a new leader poses risks. Of just making sure you choose the right person, because if you choose the wrong person, the danger for the Conservative Party is that they lose the next election. Now, I'm of the view if they choose the right person and the economy recovers, they have a very good chance of winning the next election. But on that point.
But Sarah, can I just ask you quickly? You're in a red wall seat. What do you think will take to actually hold that seat?
Well, if I'm honest, our MP isn't seen an awful lot around town. So on a personal level, I think she needs to make herself a bit more visible. I know her and she's a nice lady, but obviously it's not just my vote, it is other people's votes. I think Grimsby, is historically known as a quite a poor, deprived area, one of the most deprived in the country. There was a film made about Grimsby by Sacha Baron Cohen, which we were just made as sort of the British version of white trash. It's not like a crime-ridden hellhole or anything. It's not, it's not as bad as probably places in London, but we have shopping centres basically falling apart. There's no major shops. It's basically pound shops and vape shops. Though that's obviously across the country, but ours is particularly bad because we're known for having really high rates of and there's nothing really to do. There's no big industries apart from the wind farms. It's quite it's a place that if you want to have a big career, you have to leave. So you need to make it a place where people want to stay, and that is the key.
And I'm assuming a lot of the criticism of the current MP is that she really hasn't gotten a lot of that, funding more or less from the current.
Yeah, because she's quite close to Boris, so one would expect it. But obviously, also that's not how politics works. And obviously, they're going to use the excuse that COVID's put a stop everything, which to an extent is true. But that they should have sort of pushed a bit on by now, surely.
Yeah, I mean, they probably should have, to be honest with you. I mean, but, we think of the post-COVID year that we've had. It's been really a disaster for them in so many ways.
It's not been good, has it? I mean, if you look at the backlog of NHS and people dying of cancer because GPs will absolutely refuse to open their doors. So anybody who kicks the GPs up the arse, they'll get my vote.
And it's not even just GPs, the police. I mean, the Met Police, we just saw the Telford report come out.
Oh,
which
I could do a whole episode on that.
Staggering.
I could do a whole episode.
If you don't know what the Telford report is, effectively, it's very similar to the Rotherham report, where around over 1,000 girls have been allowed to be systematically groomed and in gangs, and the Telford police did nothing about it.
They were scared of being accused of being racist because a large amount of the people who did it were Asian men. And there's been cases where police have literally just said, we don't want the Asian community betting for our blood.
British policing, it really is in dire straits at the moment with that kind of thing. The Met Police being put in special provisions. There have been some really terrible stories coming from the Met Police.
Sarah Everard.
I'm just going to go with there was a dead body that was photographed with
Oh
police
yeah, that was
officers sharing it in
horrendous.
group chats
That
and
was
laughing about it,
horrendous.
which is,
Right.
awful. The government really needs to start. Someone needs to step in. I think with the Met Police, you can kind of get away with it by saying Sadiq Khan needs to get involved. But someone needs to get a handle on things.
No,
Yeah.
a lot of that is an intriguing dynamic, unfortunate dynamic. But on that point, tomorrow obviously ballot 2 kicks off of this leadership contest. What are you two looking for with tomorrow's ballot?
Well, I just think who's going to get the votes needed, and I think it's looking like the league table at the moment is probably going to stay pretty much the same in terms of positions.
What's the number that they need to make tomorrow? I can't remember.
It's so it was 20 last time. I think it might be 40, but I think it also probably would be higher than that. So I don't know the
I don't
exact
think,
number.
if I recall correctly, I don't think they put out a number. I just think whoever has the lowest votes just gets removed from the ballot.
Fair enough. Well, I think that realistically, it's going to be extremely difficult for people to predict, just because there's been so many private endorsements and not, we can't really give a full read about it. I mean, if we were to look at just the
The numbers.
the public endorsements, Tom Dugan has 20 or something like that. Zahawi, Hunt, and Suella had like 13 going into today, and she now she is over 40. Oh no, she is over 30. It's just
Yes,
incredible.
32.
It's like I don't think anyone can really make a prediction. The favorite to go out would be Suella because she only survived by 2. But who knows? That's the honest answer. Who knows?
Yeah,
Anything can happen.
I think there's always the fact that MPs will say things and face to face, but once they're in the private ballot, it's them and their little pen or pencil. I don't which one they use, and the paper they get to fill off in their eyes. But no, I think what will be interesting to see is if what the changes are in terms of the spread between the top 3, really 4. If they're as close as Morton, I assume Sunak and Morton will get more votes their way. That really won't change that dynamic, but it's intriguing. I mean, Truss and Kimmy Badenoch are right on each other's heels. Whether that gap closes or breaks to someone's way, Tom Tiganat, had been rumored to. He is expected to do well with the votes that are out there. So it's an intriguing dynamic of what happens there. I mean, Braverman got over the line, but obviously, in terms of if we go by what the numbers are, what today's leadership contest was, she'd be the one most in danger of being removed on that. But of course, that depends on what MPs do privately, and really also what internal pushes there are. I mean, there's been reports all day that there's been pushes by the ERG for Braverman to drop out. To try and prop up Truss and allow and try to get Tugendhat out, but that doesn't seem, as of now, to have pushed her to drop out.
The ERG is split. I mean, you have ERG members who are currently endorsed publicly Tom Tugendhat, which you'd imagine to be the complete opposite of what would happen. So I mean, I think the ERG will be more fragmented than people suspect.
I mean, it's quite possible. I mean, also in fact, I think a lot of people forget the ERG takes in a lot of people with fun ideological leanings within the party. They're not all a bunch of, I think, the stereotype right-wingers on everything outside of the issue of Brexit. But no, it'll be intriguing, of course. Tomorrow, of course, is the second ballot. That, unless they change the rules overnight, will just mean the lowest vote total of the 6 will be removed. And then the third ballot will be on Monday. And we get 2 debates on Friday and Sunday, which will be quite fun.
Wow. I'm excited. I don't know about you, Sarah. I'm excited.
You can apply to be in the virtual audience, which I'm going to do.
Oh, send that to me because I'm going to get in there as well.
Yeah, I'll send you the link. I need to do it myself, actually, but I'll send you the email.
I will say the debate will be curiously interesting, assuming it's 5 and the 5 we, on paper as of now the ballots, how that, dynamic works out, especially the fact that there'll be likely Sunak with the most MPs, but then Morton will probably be the most popular option. How that debate works. Does Sunak really go in to try to, play a little more of a harsh debate on Morton? Does she try and, make herself more of an appealing option? Does she try and weaken in Sunak or Truss? It's an interesting dynamic of what the candidates, assuming it's the five, on paper that probably should make it on numbers, how they, try and, react to said debate.
I also think it'll be interesting how Tukin does, considering he's the only one that was never in the Boris government, because I think he could gain a lot of momentum if he just says, to every single one of them, why didn't you resign, or why didn't you resign sooner?
Right. I mean, there's he could make that point. I mean, the biggest problem, a lot of them are on that stage, you're going to face. Sunak was the man who ran the economy till last week. So a lot of the economic questions are going to be directed at him. I mean, Truss has stayed in the government while a lot of her senior colleagues, resigned. The loyalty question. And I mean, assuming Kemi Badenoch is the one who's in fourth, a lot of questions are going to be, why should you be prime minister if you've never been a secretary of state in your life? You've never served the cabinet.
Well, I think the greater question will probably be given to her is outside of, she's going to be really tested, and because she's clearly coming into this with half-baked ideas and policies, and on a debate, she's going to be put under more scrutiny, I think, than she ever would have been before.
She's
so it's going to be really
substance.
interesting to see. Well, yeah, because who knows if she's got anything there.
Right. I mean, it's going to be a debate where she can't just say, catchy phrases, we want to go after identity, bathrooms and whatnot. People on the stage are going to expect, substantive answers, especially the fact she's going to be on the stage with 3 people who have served in cabinet and 1 person who's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Or the current Attorney General, should Braverman, get in.
Well, Trump got through that experience, so it'll be interesting to see if she can do the same.
Yeah, but Trump and Britain America and Britain are 2 different countries.
Yeah.
In America, being an outsider is celebrated. In the UK, people value the cabinet more than they do in America, because the cabinet in America, to many, I think, is seen as kind of just like there, but don't really do anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much.
The UK is just. Yeah.
The cabinet here is like a nice glorified position. If you get a nice, great office of state here, you just get a nice career out of it. But the cabinet's not really that special. Maybe if it was, 100 or something years ago, or 50 years ago. But no, Badenoch will be intriguing how that, she works, having not done it before. Morton, it will be interesting how many of the candidates open fire on her, because her having the membership vote. Because I would have to imagine Sunak and Truss's camps would have to go after Morton, at least on that stage, to try and set up some narrative of trying to weaken her come the Monday vote, or whatever, or how many other votes she would be on. Because I assume the likelihood is that Truss and Morton are probably going to be the 2 fighting, knock on wood, probably for that second spot to go into the final contest.
I've seen Morton act under pressure. I've seen a video of someone. She was on a stage and someone just walked on and started talking to her and criticizing her, and she dealt with that really calmly in a really pressured situation. I imagine she's going to do it significantly better than Truss.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe any of them have ever been in a debate of that high pressure, unless you count the Commons as that. Maybe Sunak is the budget time, but yeah, I mean, it's an intriguing pressure situation, because MPs and members will probably be watching that, and the MPs will probably be looking on their papers and saying, who says this answer that I like and who doesn't. And I think, of course, the key number, according to almost everyone, is that 119 is the number you probably need to get on the final ballot. So where we are when those debates enter in terms of those closest to the number line will be even more intriguing. But no,
it's going to be an exciting time.
Yeah, it will be exciting. Of course, the expectation is that on July 21st, the hope is that the MPs will send two MPs off to the membership, and then the membership will have about a month and a half to determine that. I know this is going to be
a nice birthday present for my dad, because that's my dad's birthday, even though he's not a member of the party or anything, but it's his birthday.
Well, I'm sure we'll enjoy that. So with this coming to the end of this, what should thoughts on you. What should be looked on for the next week of MPs voting on? Something to watch as a trend, and also in general, what's something you think that any candidate should be looked at or watched for? So I'll give Aaron first.
Well, I think first of all, for the American audience, I think they're going to be surprised about how fast the British news moves in comparison to America, because in Britain something can be a story for a day and then the entire news cycle's moved on the next one, which is why the Partygate was such a drip thing, because of the way that the British news cycle just cycles things through and then completely forgets it, but I don't think it happens in America as much. What we should be expecting is things to move very quickly. We should be expecting I think we should be expecting Mordaunt and Truss to pick up a lot of the transfers, because maybe Tukendat and Benedok as well, but I don't. I mean, someone just tweeted from the Telegraph a really interesting tweet that out of 13 MPs to back someone else after their preferred candidate, only one's gone with Sunak, which is extremely interesting. So Sunak really is going to have to drive up his numbers organically. Expect a really interesting debate, because what people are going to be needing to show is substance. For the first time, they're going to be scrutinized. What really going to need? We need to see a coherent economic policy. We're going to hear their plans for healthcare. We've got to hear their plans for immigration and crime, and because immigration especially is a big thing with the Conservative membership, so that's going to be a big thing. You may see someone trans, but I think that no one's really going to care about that except for the trans community. And I think we're going to see Mordaunt and Sunak in the final two.
I would probably agree. Mordaunt and Sunak are probably the likeliest two, but as has been said, that a week is a long time in politics. I think we'll see a lot of British passive aggressiveness. I think the debates won't be as fiery as what we would expect in America. I think there'll be the polite British hiding behind a smile, with all due respect kind of situation. I think we'll definitely see the membership continue to separate from the parliamentary party. I continue to think that Rishi Sunak will be popular with MPs and not with members. I think members are seeking a more conservative, traditionally conservative in terms of economy. Social issues aren't really, as has been said, that big an issue to people. In the way that the abortion debate is so big in America, here it's not really that much of a discussion. So I think we'll see sort of the British parliamentary system really come into play here. And I think it'll be interesting for observers from different types of government to see sort of how a parliamentary system is for good or for ill.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I think it will be very interesting, the debates. I think they'll be more entertaining than they were in 2019, just because it's a much more dynamic situation than it was in 19. I mean, 19, when they had the debates, it was pretty clear and obvious that Boris was the front runner and pretty much had it in the bag, and he pretty much played it smart with these debates. Of course, in this case, you have the situation where the MPs very well may back someone who very well may lose with the membership. It's a situation where the two are diverging on this. Of course, coming in second historically is not a bad thing with the MPs in terms of membership. I mean, in in the current system, 2001 and 2005, the second place winner with the MPs, Ian Duncan Smith and David Cameron, both ended up with the top job. But it will be, of course, very intriguing to see. I think we're going to see a whole more week of pressure. I imagine with the current dynamic that there will be someone getting a massive oppo dump. The question, of course, who that person gets a massive oppo dump is. And I do think at the moment, Penny Mordaunt is the front runner, and I think a lot of these campaigns especially the Sunak and Truss campaigns, but to a certain extent, the other two are probably going to have to make a big deal in these two debates, try and weaken her stance, whether that is to try and lock her out of the membership round or just weaken her for a membership vote, which again remains to be seen. I mean, Morton is very impressive with their abilities to speak, and will obviously the big thing that these debates will do is that there will no longer be easy sound bites. You will have to actually answer the questions. So we will finally get economic policy put in place by certain.
You say that they are politicians, so you can't guarantee it.
Well, right. Well, hopefully the presenters are good at their job, but that remains to be seen. But in terms of a prediction, I'm probably going to go with, at the moment, I'd say Sunak and Morton narrowly getting into the members round. I think it will be very close between her and Truss, but I think Morton gets in. And as of today, I'd probably say Penny Morton would be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Of course, as Sarah mentioned, a month is a long time in politics, and a lot could happen. And that is all for this show. And it was a pleasure having Aaron and Sarah on this special. And it's always nice to be able to talk, foreign politics compared to American politics, because it's a little more entertaining. But
Must be nice not to talk about Roe versus Wade for once and things like
yes,
that.
it's really nice to avoid that topic.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem. Let's see how I stop this. And I think we'll just end it here. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. How the heck?
I think that means it's over.
What word was you going to say
Just to make
earlier?
sure it is over. It's not over at the moment. I have no idea what's going on. I'll type it in the private chat.
Okay. Right, I shall leave you.
All right, have a good one.
You too.